All right, we are live on a Monday. You are listening to Talking Big Four Hoops. Thanks for joining myself and my co-host here, Mike Bunt. I'm Jonathan Snyder, and it is a little bit of a somber Monday evening as we're 24 hours removed from a tough Buffalo Bills divisional round loss. But as Mike and I were just talking a little bit off air, he made a good point. We got 9 months to talk about Bills off season and sulk in our miseries, but we only got about 6 weeks left of conference play, Mike. So um, let's start, Mike. I'm just gonna jump right into it like we do every week. We don't want to waste a whole lot of time chit chatting here. We talked last week. We really wanted to start this week a little differently, and we're gonna start in the Metro Atlantic, and we're gonna start with Canisius and Niagara, Mike. And I'm gonna just start with a basic question to you: is this league wide open?
I mean, it looks like it right now. Obviously, the top of the standings are kind of all bunched together. I would have thought going into the year it would have been Iona as a clear favorite, but that's not exactly the case right now. They are 6-2 in conference. Siena 7-2, Quinnipiac, Rider both at 6-3, and then Niagara a few games back at 5-5. So yeah, I would say at this point in time, it is a wide open league. It's a down year for the league overall. 22nd in the metrics in KenPom, but yeah, surprisingly so wide open at this point.
So let's start with Niagara, Mike. We've been a little higher on them as of late. Currently, they're a game over 500. They come off a split this weekend, a tough 3-point loss against Rider. They come back with a 2-point road win against St. Peter's on yesterday. So they are 10-9, Mike, and you just mentioned 5-5 in the league. That puts them 3 games back. You could say 2.5 games back of first place, Siena. It puts them in a really good position where they're currently sitting basically a tie for 4th, Mike. I would kind of put it as the unequal playing of games so far, makes it a little tougher. But Quinnipiac's won 6 in a row. They're at 6-3. Iona's at 6-2. Siena's up top at 7-2. You got Rider right ahead of them at 6-3. Fairfield at 5-4. So that Rider loss really was a decent swing. But let's talk this weekend, Mike. So they go on the road. They get a split. I think me and you both think they could have won both those games. But where do you stand on Niagara right now?
They're still struggling to finish games. It's frustrating because I don't think you or I thought that Niagara was a great team entering this year. So where they're sitting right now is actually maybe even a little bit better than what both of us would have even expected prior to the season. But what's frustrating is after they got off to the hot start where they were 9-5 overall and 4-1 in conference play, we saw that there was a stretch in front of them where they really had a chance to really make a mark for themselves and decide if they were going to be in that upper echelon, that tier 1, where you're in the top 3, or if you're going to be a middle of the pack type squad. And they've kind of leveled themselves out a little bit where they are the middle of the pack. They're sitting in 6th place, a half game behind Fairfield. And then there's the big 4 teams that are 6-2 and then Siena at 7-2. The thing that I get frustrated with Niagara is you look at the last 5 games, 5-point loss on the road against Manhattan. That's probably, I know it's a road game, but not a very good Manhattan team. A 6-point loss at home against Siena where they got off to a strong first half and then just let the game get away from them in the last 20 minutes. You lose at home by 2 to Marist, which is really kind of an unacceptable loss for Niagara this year. And then a loss against Rider by 3 on the road, which was kind of a coin flip game, even when the Rider was playing at Niagara. They get back on track with a 2-point win against St. Peter's. But even that game was a contest where the Purple Eagles almost blew a sizable lead late. And I'm just frustrated because those 4 losses were all games that could have gone either way. And Niagara just did not have the ability to close out those contests. And you think about it, if you just reverse the results of 2 of those games, they're sitting at 12-7 at this point and 7-3 in conference play. And if they were 7-3, they'd be a half game back of Siena. They'd have the same amount of wins as Siena, but 1 more loss in the max standings. And it's aggravating because we right now know that Niagara can basically compete with any team in this conference other than maybe Iona. And the metrics would say, even though Iona isn't in first place, that they are ahead of everybody else in the conference
Yeah.
based on their Ken Palm and all that stuff. But I'm just hoping that when it comes down to it, that Niagara is able to pull out some of these games against some of the lesser competition down the stretch, and that they can finish with an above 500 record, because their margin of error is so thin that
Yes, it is.
they really don't have the ability to they really can't dominate teams, but it's tough for other teams to dominate them too. So it's one of those where regardless of who they play, the top of the conference, the bottom of the conference, I feel like each of these games is going to be a coin flip the rest of the way.
Yeah, Mike, the margin for error is a great point. The Iona loss was tough. It was a 22-point loss on the road, and they had a 12-point win over Mount St. Mary's. Every other conference game has been decided by 8 points or less, with specifically the last, I think the last 5 games, all being decided by 6 or less. They're in like a little bit of a situation where they are never going to blow anybody out. They're not going to blow out. But that also is like one of the most frustrating things, because you're probably going to lose a bunch of games that you should win, and you're going to win some games you should lose. I mean, they have a 4-point win at Quinnipiac, Mike. I mean, not too long ago, league leading Quinnipiac, and then they lose to Manhattan and Marist, and it's just they're very unpredictable right now. They're tough to really put your finger on, and that was made evident in that game against Rider. If you dive a little bit into the box score in that game, Mike, you can see they had a 5-point lead at halftime, shot 52% in the first half, and went 7 for 13 from three. In the second half, they make just 6 field goals, Mike. They only attempted 17 shots. They went 6 of 17 from the floor. It's 35%. They allowed Ryder to shoot 50% in the second half, and 14 of 16 at the free throw line. I mean, it's just a tale of two halves. You're up 5 on the road. You're shooting the ball well, which you haven't done all year long, and then you just revert back to your old ways in the second half. There's a couple things in the box score, Mike, and you know me, I'm not as much of a numbers guy, but there's two donuts in this box score that concern me. 0 second chance points and 0 fast break points, compared to Ryder, 10 second chance points, 8 fast break points. All right, Ryder outscores them 28-12 in the paint, and 13-7 off of turnovers. Those are just some of the dive down metrics that have to be better. You're not getting any points on second chance, which means they're a one and done team. They're not getting any second chance points. Not any. Right? Fast break. That means they're not getting easy buckets, not in transition, not changing the tempo of the game. That means every possession has to be is always defended well. It's long, and it usually results in a late shot clock shot. I don't think that's a sustainable way to continue to win games, and I think you'll just continue right now to see an up and down. You'll see a team that could surprise some people in March. But I think you're going to see a team finish right around where they are right now, which, again, you made the point. That would be better than we would have thought to start the year.
And we've been talking about the Ken Palm projections all year. Right now, Ken Palm has them going 15-14 overall and 10-10 in Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference play. So that's as average as you can be. And it's a down year for the league. So their numbers in Ken Palm are actually behind where they were last year. They were 190th in Ken Palm last year, despite having a losing record. But it kind of feels right. And the crazy thing is, you mentioned about their tempo and different things. Their adjusted tempo is 358th in the country. And there's about, I think, 363 teams or something right around there. And their average possession length on offense is 361st. So they really do elongate every possession. They milk the clock. And I don't know if that's intentional or just style-wise, but when I look at this Niagara team, there's really only 3 players that stand out from an offensive perspective. You obviously have Noah Thomason, who is one of the best players in the conference, is a quality scorer, and he's been reliable all season for them. You have Aaron Gray, who actually had a very quiet game in the win against St. John's. I believe he didn't even score in that contest. He only saw 18 minutes, 0 for 3 from the field, no points. And then Sam Iorio, who has been heating up a little bit in recent games, who is the one forward presence that really is an impact player. And what really kind of struggles on for Niagara is they really don't have much of a physical post presence on this team outside of Iorio, who can sometimes be overmatched by some bigger guys as well. So it's really, when you're talking about Niagara, you're trying to be, when you're critiquing them, it can be difficult at times because you want to acknowledge that at times this is a team that's maybe outperforming their expectations, but you also want to hold them accountable because you realize they had a chance to be even better than what they are right now. But we'll see how it plays out. Offensively, they do shoot a decent percentage from three, and that's helped them a lot this year. But you almost wonder, do they slow it down because they know that there's a little bit of a talent gap between them and most of their opponents, and they realize that a slower paced game focused on maybe a higher efficiency metric where you just hit a higher field goal percentage and then limit the amount of defensive possessions where you're guarding other teams. Maybe that's the way they look at getting victories, and maybe that's why it is such a toss up with them on a night to night basis, because it does come down to those one or two possessions.
Yeah, Mike, they average 52 field goal attempts per game, and they don't shoot a ton of free throws. So it's not like they average 52 shots and they're averaging 24 attempts at the line, which would basically make it around 60 to 64 field goal attempts. Their turnovers are okay. They only turn the ball over 11 times a game. I mean, that's pretty good. I just don't see that style holding up as it gets later and later in the year because teams are, they know you more. And like I said, the conference schedule just gets brutal. So I just think you'll see up and down results.
That's where they need to improve their talent overall in
Yeah.
their pool. Once they improve their talent pool, they won't need to play that style of basketball going forward. So I look at it as they more so play this style because they recognize what they are overall. And I do have to give them credit. Against St. Peter's, they forced 18 turnovers. So that was a really strong defensive performance. And the last thing I want to say on Niagara before we move on to Canisius is these next two games are going to be absolutely pivotal to what we see with the Purple Eagles moving forward. They play Manhattan on Friday at home, and then Canisius at home on the Friday following that on February 3rd. Both of those are must wins. Right now, you're talking about Niagara sitting at 10-9, getting to 12-9, then 7-5, and MAC play is going to be important because following that, you have Siena on the road, Quinnipiac at home, and Iona at home, which is going to be the most challenging three-game stretch that they have remaining on the season. If they don't find a way to at least split the next two, you're looking at a scenario where if they drop the next two, default to 10-11, you could be sitting at 10-14 at the 24-game mark and then be potentially 4 or 5 games under 500. So I think it's important. They need to split these next two, hopefully find a way to get a sweep. And if they can get to that 12-9 and 7-5 point in conference play and find a way to just win one of those 3 tough games, you're going to be sitting at least above 500 heading into the final couple weeks of the season. So we're going to see if they have it in them. It's going to be challenging, but I think this Niagara team has the ability to keep up with Siena, with Quinnipiac. I don't know about Iona, but if they can find a way to survive this next 5 games, go maybe 3-2 overall, then you got a stretch of 5 with Mount St. Mary's, Marist, Fairfield, St. Peter's, and Canisius to end the season, where maybe you can put together a solid win-loss record.
Yeah, I'll close our Niagara talk, Mike, with watching the end of that Rider game. I was disappointed at the execution on the offensive on the offensive side of the ball. I thought they were up 2 or 3, and they got ripped around half court. Came down, got fouled. Next offensive possession, just a lot of dribbling, a lot of standing around, not a lot of movement, and they just kind of, I don't like the word choke because they kind of choked the game away. Just kind of fumbled it. They kind of fumbled it at the end, like due to lack of execution. And the final shot Thomason made, it was barely any ball screens or anything. He just kind of came off a little rub screen and kind of hoisted up an off balance three that didn't really have a shot to go in. So I'd like to see some better execution down the stretch, and that's just going to come from experience. I think they'll get better at that, Mike. I don't know if that's going to be throughout the last 6 weeks of this season or if it's going to be more into next year if this core sticks around. But that's what I'm looking to see out of them. But we want to shift our attention now to Canisius, who is currently, after a couple back and forth wins, after winning 3 or 4, they were 0-2 this past weekend. Losses at Fairfield by 9 and at conference leading Quinnipiac by 5, which was a good effort, but a loss nonetheless. So 5-14 are the Griffs. They sit 3-7 in the league. They're a half game above last place St. Peter's. Mike, I think at this point we kind of know who Canisius is, and we can kind of say that they're kind of exactly what we thought, Mike. I think we would think that Niagara's outperforming our preseason expectations, and I would say that Canisius is just probably right at those expectations.
Yeah, they had that few game stretch where they got a little bit of confidence in us to think, well, maybe they can compete with some of the middle tier of the Metro Atlantic. But the last 2 games were kind of bringing back down to earth a little bit. I will say this. They gave Quinnipiac a great performance on Sunday. They lost by 5. Quinnipiac is a team in the top 150 at KenPom, and they did give the Bobcats a tough battle. Both of these were on the road. It's one of those where, again, it's tough to be hard on Canisius because the expectations were lower entering this year. But you also don't want to be the person that's talking about moral victories when you're 5-14 and you're losing conference games and you're 3-7 overall. What I will say about Canisius is I think they're scrappy. I think they still battle hard most of their games. And a lot of these contests, they do have opportunities to stay in it and win it. The problem against Fairfield when they battled them was there was a huge free throw disparity. Canisius was 9 of 11 from the line. Fairfield was 18 of 28. You look at the other metrics, Fairfield 22 of 49, Canisius 23 of 56. The big difference in that game came down to foul disparity. And then you look at the Quinnipiac game, that wasn't the case for them. But against Quinnipiac, they allowed the Bobcats to shoot 53% from the field. So it's one of those things where Canisius just doesn't get consistency in different areas. There's always something that's standing out in the box score most of these games. And it's whether it's offense or defense, it's just been a frustrating year. I don't want to get too deep because I don't want to make it sound like I'm bashing them. But you look at the adjusted efficiency numbers, they're 276 on offense, 249 on defense. Their effective field goal percentage is 318th in the country on offense, 298th on defense. When you look at KenPom, they break down everything in green and red. The darker the red, the worse you are in a category. The greener, the brighter the green, the better you are. And you look at offense and defensively in Canisius, and there's plenty of categories where they're in the 300s or low 200s in the nation. And that's just not going to get you many victories, even when you're going up against inferior competition. And one thing that Canisius lately I do find interesting is that Reggie is starting to mess with the lineups a little bit. We talked last week on the show about TJ Gadsden and how he has started to make a little bit of an impact for the Griffs. Against Fairfield, he struggled. He had only 4 points. But then against Quinnipiac, he had 22 points on 7 of 15 from the field. But then another player that's also starting to make a little bit of an impact in recent games is Trey Dinkins, or Dinkins. I'm sorry. And you're starting to see Canisius at least give some other players more minutes and opportunities to really stand out. And at this point, why not? You're struggling. It's been a long season. Try to see if you got something in your younger players that can step up I will say it's been a rough go of it for Taj Savesky in recent games. He really hasn't played at the level that we saw him earlier in the season. So it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, Canisius is probably a bottom 100 team in the country. And
Yeah, like,
when you're in that
there's something.
scenario, there's really not much you can do. The positives are when you can play competitive against good competitions, but on most nights, you're going to be an underdog.
There's one thing too. You mentioned Tversky. He only played 11 minutes against Quinnipiac. He was not in foul trouble. Um, I'm not sure. He had just played 30 plus the night before. So I wonder if there's something more there, whether it be a minor injury or just Reggie didn't feel like going to him that night. I mean, that is, if you look at his stats this year in terms of what he's been playing. I mean, he's only been under 20 once prior to that game when he had 11, and the prior 5 games before that he had played no less than 30 minutes. So I'm wondering what the sudden change in that was, because I gotta think that he makes them a better team with him on the floor. Um, so I'd
You
be
think
interested.
so, but he is struggling. He is down to about 35% shooting from the
Yep.
field right now, and he hasn't been distributing the ball at a high level either for Canisius. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be a guard and you're not shooting a high percentage, but you're a double digit scorer, and then simultaneously you're not opening things up for other people, at some point you're going to have your minutes reduced. And this is just going through the last 3 games, John. Against Siena, 3 of 11 with 2 assists, 2 turnovers. Then against Fairfield, 4 of 15, 2 assists, 1 turnover. And then Quinnipiac, 2 of 6, 4 points, 0 assists, 2 turnovers. And you got to remember, he's a freshman. It's not an easy transition playing D1 hoops. And I don't know if there's something more going on. Is he battling through something? I don't know. I don't have that type of information, but it does seem like he has hit hit a wall at this point
Yeah.
of the season. He wasn't shooting a high percentage earlier in the year, but he's definitely seen a bit of a reduction in the recent weeks. He had a good 2 game stretch against St. Peter's and Marist, but overall it's going down. What you see with Reggie with some of these changes too is it just doesn't feel like he has guys on the squad that he really trusts.
Yep.
Even the older veterans aren't really people that you can say he can rely on to step up, and it's not their fault. I don't want to say that it's a lack of effort or if it's I don't think it's an effort thing either. It's I just don't think they're really that great, and that's tough, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, Mike. The only reason I bring that up is because end of January, it's a little bit more unusual to see such a drastic change like that in one game. So like I said, without having watched that entire game and knowing a little more details, and there was no report or announcement of any sort of injury. So maybe he was 4 of 15 the night before, and he was over 3 from 3. So it could have been, and he started that game 2 for 6 and 0 for 1. So it could have been a, hey, listen, you just don't got it this weekend. We're going to give give it to somebody else. Mike, I think there is. I think it's just really, we just kind of talk about the same thing every week with Canisius. I think that they are who they are, and the expectations are the expectations, and I'm not sure they're going to change anytime soon. And I'm not talking in the next weeks. I'm talking in the next years. I don't know if this is something that's going to change. I don't know if this is just what Canisius basketball is right now and is going to be for the foreseeable future. But you talked about moral victories. It's still Division One hoops, Mike. It's Division One hoops, and you can't be moral victories when you're 5 and 14. Okay, and I just think that this team is not that talented. They are scrappy. Okay, and they have shown to be a little bit better of a quality team in terms of staying in games than they were early in the year. So I will give them some credit in the sense that I believe that that non-conference slate helped them. The only, where I lose it with them is just the inability to have any sort of consistency. Um, they had a game, was it 2 weeks ago, Mike, against Marist at home, lost by 20. Um, that just can't happen at home. I mean, it's going to happen on the road. They lose on the road by 4 at Mount St. Mary's. A few weeks later, they beat Siena at home by 4. It's just, I don't know. I don't have a read on these guys. I feel like I'm talking in circles with them sometimes because I just don't know what to think. So
Is
I
this
think they're
fair?
a
Is
team.
this a fair thing to say? Their talent is probably bottom 50 to bottom 100 in the country. They
Yeah,
have a talent deficit to where even though they're in a conference that's struggling and having a really bad year with a lot of teams that are also in that bottom 100, they're still amongst the bottom
yeah,
overall of that. But Reggie is a veteran coach where he's been in D1 hoops long enough to where even with that inferior talent, he can have them step up to a challenge every once in a while to where you think maybe they do gotta have some potential. They have some ability to where when they played Toledo, where they played St. Bonaventure, where they played uh, Florida Gulf Coast and beat Siena and recently battled Quinnipiac, where you think maybe they actually are a little bit better than what we think. But in reality, those are outliers that are the once in a while performance. That is not the consistent result. And it also should be asked when Canisius has a performance like that, is that Canisius playing up to their competition or is that their opponent playing down to Canisius? And unfortunately, a lot of Grist fans probably won't like this. It's probably more likely than not other schools playing down to Canisius rather than the Grist playing up to them. And you don't want to take credit away from a program when they play a solid game and they almost upset a Toledo, almost upset a Florida Gulf Coast, or defeat St. Bonaventure. But a lot of those schools are programs that have had success at the mid-major level in the past decade, and they know that Canisius is not on their level from a recent history standpoint. And for a lot of these college kids that have never heard of a school like Canisius, when they go up against them, they might not have their A-level focus or even enthusiasm early, which can be the difference in Canisius competing in a game or really not. So uh, it's just one of those tough seasons, and like we've said on the show plenty of times in recent episodes, Canisius is going to have to do a lot of evaluating going forward in the future, and it's we're going to see those decisions in the upcoming years, what they decide to do, because right now, if we're being real, they're more of a participation trophy school than a school that's actively trying to win games at a D1 level.
yeah, yeah. You kind of hit the nail on the head, Mike. Let's transition from the Metro, Mike. I want to get into the Atlantic 10. Um, another school, another Big Four school, another roller coaster ride, Mike. It just is the theme this year. Um, St. Bonaventure this week, Mike, was 1-1. A home 9-point win over Duquesne, and a disappointing 12-point loss at Loyola Chicago on Saturday. 2 games this week: home against Fordham on Wednesday, at VCU on Saturday. What do we think? What do we think, Mike? 67-55 on the road at Loyola, that's their only conference win.
Yeah, not a good year for Loyola. I mean, they've been great in the last 5 years, but
Yeah.
they're horrible this year. What the takeaway is, this is a St. Bonaventure team that is still very young, very inexperienced in certain areas, and being led by two guards who, when they have it, can play with the best in the A10, and when they don't have it, can lose to teams like Canisius on the road. And the Bonnies like we said last week on the show, they have plenty of reasons to be optimistic. We said that Duquesne game was going to be very important for them, and it was. And they showed up and they got a win against a top 130 Ken Palm team, coming off of another win against a top 120 Ken Palm win. So you get back-to-back wins over top 130 teams, you're playing pretty good basketball. Yeah. And then how do you follow it up? You go on the road against a 236 ranked Loyola team, and you look horrendous. I think the takeaway from this is that this Bonnet team is going to be up and down the entire season.
Yeah.
Don't get too high. Don't get too low. There's going to be a lot of growing pains. And unfortunately, that's the way it's going to be. Ken Palm has them going 15-16 and 9-9 overall. And that, to me, that looks pretty spot on, because you don't know what you're going to get on a nightly basis from the squad. I actually think their start to A10 play has been pretty solid at 4-3 overall. Disappointing that they lost to Loyola. That would have been a really good shot to get to 5-2 and really build up a solid start. But if we got to talk about the guards. We really do have to talk about the guards, because we focus on them every show. But against Loyola, it was a tremendously disappointing performance. Kyrell Luke was 2 of 16 from the field and 1 of 6 from 3. Daryl Banks III was 3-11, including 1 of 8 from 3. So they were combined 5 of 27 from 2, which is less than 20% shooting. And then you factor in the team had 61 shots. So you go 5 of 27. That's almost half your shots from 2 guards who are supposed to be your 2 best players. And then a combined 1 of 14 from three-point land, 12 points and 2 assists and 2 turnovers from your 2 best players that are guards. It's horrendous. It's horrible. And there's all of the teams that we cover locally in mid-major basketball, and this can go any level, high level D1, low level D1. Most teams do significantly better at home than on the road. It's a comfort level. It's shooting through the hoops that they're used to shooting, same routine, practice, meals, all that stuff. But they are completely different. We got a comment actually here. Bodies are a different team at the Riley Center compared to on the road. Absolutely. 100%. And when you watch them at the Riley Center, they're running sets. They're effective. They're shooting the ball well. They look like a team that could be among the top teams in the A10. When they go on the road, they are sloppy. They force up long heaves from 3. They're not moving the ball. It's almost like they're intimidated to be on the road, which makes sense to a certain degree. But it's the growing pains, John, and the hope is eventually, with experience, with more time, that this team will be able to get out of that and will be able to improve on the road. Something I would suggest, and I'm not a D1 coach, so this is kind of pointless for me to say, try to get the big men more involved when you're playing in these road environments. If the shots aren't falling for the guards, you need another answer. Go inside. Yeah. Try to get Venning involved. Try to get Farrell involved. Try to mix it up, because I think Bana is too guard reliant right now with Banks and Kyrell Luke, and when they're off, like it's really ugly. And I don't want to feel like I'm just killing them, because they are the Bonnie's 2 best players. Like Banks averages just under 16 points a game, and Luke is 13 points a game, and they combine for nearly 7 assists. But their field goal percentages on the year are 36.8 and 35.4%. If you're under 40, you're not shooting a good rate. So maybe instead of just having the offense circle around them taking 20 shots a game combined and just jacking up a million shots, maybe the offense needs to mix some stuff up. And obviously Mark Schmidt knows this. Obviously the whole fan base knows this. But what are they going to do to fix it? That's what I wonder.
Yeah, Mike. This is a team, and it took me a while, but I think I've settled in on understanding what this team is. And I've actually become a little bit more comfortable, Mike, with the future. And I think that I maybe had a little bit too high expectations, and it was almost unfair expectations for Mark Schmidt to be able to just keep it rolling like nothing ever, like nobody ever left. And I think that was a little bit overzealous on my part. I maybe a little even for how much I appreciated those five seniors. I might have even underappreciated them a little bit, that I thought that they could plug in five new guys and be a contender in the A10. Now, I'm not saying that they're not a middle of the pack and can surprise some people. There's a lot of games left to be played. But I do think that whatever this team does in the postseason, and by postseason I mean Atlantic 10 conference play, is going to be just a building block for next year. So I think the hope is, Mike, that they can finish the A10 slate over 500, continue to get more games together, continue to get more time on the floor together, continue to try and get more comfortable on the road together, and then go to where do they play the A10 now? In Brooklyn? No. Yeah,
That's
they
where
play
they've had
in
it in the
Brooklyn.
past. But
Yeah.
they
Yes.
they need to. It's a building year. It's a year
Yeah.
where they don't have expectations. It's about figuring out what they will be going forward. And I think the other thing you look at this team, is this a finished product, or will there be new players coming in with the transfer
Yeah.
portal and the way things
Good
work?
point, Mike.
I don't think you can assume that this is what we're going to be seeing next year going forward.
I
I
would
think
agree.
there's going to be definitely parts of this team that are going to be tremendous impact players going forward, but I do think there could be some adjustments to be made. I just, you know, we've been spoiled with St. Bonaventure for the past decade.
Yeah.
We've seen some amazing players uh, come through Olean, and it's this is more of what we saw with Bonaventure before Mark Schmidt was here, where they would have a build up to a very good year, but those good years weren't every year. It was once every 4 or 5 seasons they would have that solid record. And
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
we're necessarily at that level where it's going to be take 3 years of building to get to where they want to be. But I think this is one of those unfortunate down years following a 3 year period, 4 year period where you built up so much with that strong five. And sometimes the best and worst thing about having built around 4 to 5 solid players is that they had that run where when they were freshmen, they went to an A10 championship. When they were juniors, they win the A10 tournament. When they're seniors, they go to the NIT Final Four. But you didn't have anything behind them to take over. So you're basically starting anew. And because of that, you go through the frustrations of having to rebuild after one of the great 2-3 year runs in Bana history, outside of obviously the tremendous days in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s. But I'm talking like the last 40 years. But I think it's going to get better. I do think we're going to see a team that continues to get better as the season goes on. But I do think that Banks and Kyrell Luke do need to lift their game up to another level. I don't think it's acceptable for them to combine to shoot 5 of 27 from the field, regardless of who the opponent is, regardless of if it's on the road. Those are the few guys that actually have some playing experience heading into the season for Bana, and you can't have them both struggle that much
Yeah.
in the game.
To that point, Mike, it's one thing when one of those guys struggles. It's a nightmare if both of them struggle on the same night, and that's what you got on Saturday. It's important to know. You brought up a couple good points that I want to touch on. Number one, it's important to note that this team is not bad.
No,
And
no, no. That's the thing, John. They are a decent team.
yeah,
Like this is the opposite of like Niagara and Canisius, where we're afraid to be overly critical. We're almost more critical of Bonaventure
yeah,
because we know they actually have the ability. Like this year, they've already beaten Notre Dame, Middle Tennessee State, Cleveland State, UMass, George Mason, Richmond, Duquesne, and like none of those teams is great by any measure. But out of those 4, 6, 7, those are 7 top 165 teams.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like Bonus Ken Palm has them at 165. and you've had 7 wins of teams better than that. So, yes, this Bonnie's team doesn't match up to the last 4 years, but if this is a bad year for Bonaventure, then that just tells you when they do get better, they're going to be back to being a top 100 team again.
You took the words right out of my mouth. You took the words exactly out of my brain, Mike. That's exactly what I was thinking. If this is a down year, okay, in a Mark Schmidt era, that just goes to show you what he's done to lift the level of this program up. It's kind of similar to what the Bills are going through right now. I mean, to think that 5 years ago we were celebrating getting into the playoffs, and now it's
We're happy to
snowball
be
and bust.
9-7. Now we're 13-3 and talking about firing people.
Exactly. So it's a compliment to Schmidt and the culture and the expectations that he's created, which are great. But when he is 10-10, right, in a year that he lost all 5 professional, those are 5 pros he lost, Mike. Let's not get it mistaken. I mean, Holmes has been, or not Holmes. Attaway has bounced around the G League, and the other 4 are going to make some money after this year. Okay, those are 5 professional basketball players, and he lost them all. And he's got this team we just talked about 10 minutes away from being 5-2 in the Atlantic 10.
Yeah.
So I am comfortable with where this team is at. I would like to see them find a way to win those games when it's pretty. You can almost bet between Luke and Banks, just the volume of shots they take and the reliance on them, that they are one of those guys is not going to shoot well each game. So they're going to shoot below 50%. The goal is if you can get Venning going early, if you can get Farrell going early, it now creates a situation where the defense has to account for those guys, which can allow the first 3 or 4 shots for Luke and Banks not to be long threes, contested fadeaways, drive to the basket against 2 defenders. They might be able to be an open backdoor layup because the attention's on Farrell, or Vennings catch the ball 2 straight possessions on the low block and he scored. Well, now they bring the double from the weak side, and now Banks is open in the opposite corner for an open 3. That's what I would like to see a little bit more of. I think that's going to just come with time, Mike. I think Banks can play.
And I
mean,
think that's the
Luke
thing,
can
John.
play.
I don't think anybody doubts that Kyra Luke and Daryl Banks have talent. I think what makes it difficult is they're both playing at a level higher than either have ever been at a college level. And they're both expected to be the guy. So Banks was at St. Peter's. He was never the guy at St. Peter's. He was good, but he was never a high efficiency shooter. He was always in the 30s. And now he comes to the A10, which is quite a jump from the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference from a overall point of view. You don't really have off opponents in the A10 like you do in the other MAC. So, and now you're being asked to put up 15 to 20 shots a game. That's not easy. And same with Luke. They don't have enough complementary players who can take the pressure off of them. And that's what Moses Flowers needs to be. That's what Venning needs to be able to do. Be able to get some points down low in the post, get some freebies on offensive rebounds, get some post touches, and take the pressure off of Luke, take the pressure off of Banks. And eventually I think you're going to see Jan Farrell really be more of a scorer on this team because he has to be. He's a freshman this year. He's having a solid freshman year. He's averaging 8.5 points and 7 rebounds per game. So that's a good numbers for a freshman in the A10. But like you said, the goal is eventually have some more complementary players step up. So when Banks and Kyra Luke are in the game, they don't feel like everything has to go through them where they're putting up 5 million shots. So if you can have some more reliable scorers that can help you out, then when they get those looks, like you said, higher probability shots, not taking one-on-one contested shots from a foot behind the three-point line. Get an open look once in a while. Get better touches. And that's when you're going to really see Bonaventure go from this A10 team that is around 500 to a team that's going to be more to their 17 plus, 20 plus win totals that we've grown accustomed to in recent years.
Yep. Scorers get more confidence when they see the ball go through the hoop, whether that's a layup or a free throw or a half court shot. So Get those guys going early with an easy bucket or two, and I think you'll see a little bit more consistency. Speaking of consistency or lack thereof, Mike, another roller coaster. Here we go. We're at Darien Lake, roller coaster number 4. Are you tall enough to ride? And UB is tall enough to ride, Mike. They are, again, up and down. A beautiful win, expected win against Bowling Green on Tuesday at home, 31-point win. And then, Mike, just an absolute golden opportunity that kind of slipped through their hands on Friday. A 9-point home loss to Toledo in a game that they had every chance to take from the Rockets. So again, another split this weekend. So 9-10, 3-3 in the league. They got Ball State on the road tomorrow and Kent State on the road on Friday. So it does not get any easier. What are your feelings, and have they changed at all? Probably not, on this Jim Weitzel coached UB Bull squad.
My feelings, they're average, below average. In the MAC, they can be a top 6 team. But this is a down year for the conference. So being a top 6 team in the MAC this year isn't really saying much for your squad overall. What I would say, to answer your question, can you be content in the MAC? The answer is no. This team is much better at home than they are on the road. And as we discussed in recent things, the schedule plays a role in that. They've had a much easier schedule at home, and they've had a lot of tough opponents on the road, taking on UConn, taking on Michigan State, battling West Virginia. So I'm not going to pretend like UB should have the same record on the road as they were at home. But what I will say is it's going to be tough for almost everybody to compete in the MAC this year. And that's because there's a Kent State Golden Flashes team that is just simply better than everyone in the conference. Kent State this year is 16-3. Their 3 losses are against Charleston, Houston, and Gonzaga. They lost to Gonzaga by 7, Houston, which was number, I think, 1 or 2 at the time, by 5, and Charleston by 2. I think all 3 of those schools right now are in the top 25.
Yeah,
so
Houston
3 losses to the
number
top
1
25 team on the road by a total of 14 points. Their KenPom is 53. They're projected to win every game the rest of the year. They might lose some of those. Like the KenPom projected record still has them going 26-5. But like as an individual head-to-head matchup, there's not one game where they're going to be an underdog in. And I've seen this Kent team play a couple times already on TV. Their defense is unbelievable. They get hands on the in the lanes. They force turnovers. Their offense actually ain't that great, but they're that good defensively that it doesn't even matter. I believe Kent State could score 65 points a game and still beat 90% of the teams in the Mid-American Conference with how well they play defense. And
they held Houston to 49 points.
Yeah, that was the number 1 team in the country up until this week. So KenPom has Kent State as the 16th best defense in the country. So then I look at UB, and KenPom has them as the 211th ranked defense in the country. UB can't guard. They can't defend. The blue-collar identity that this team was built upon under Nate Oates has been gone, and it's been gone for years. They don't get hands in the lanes. They don't make teams struggle to put up difficult shots. It's very easy to score against UB. And we saw that with Toledo, which is one of the better offenses that you will see at the mid-major level. The problem that UB has is they can kick any of these lower-tier MAC schools' butts when they're at home. They took care of Bowling Green. They got a good win against Ohio. That's actually 142 in KenPom, about 60 spots ahead of where UB is at right now. So that was a good win for UB. They took care of Northern Illinois. UB can trick you into thinking that they are a quality squad when they blow out some of their peers in the MAC. The thing about the metrics is the metrics take in margin of victory. And whenever UB plays those top 100 teams, they can't even stay close. So that really is more revealing. And right now they're in the middle of the stretch that has Toledo, Ball State on the road, Kent State, Akron. 9-10 right now. Are you going to find a way to split these next 4 games? Because if you want to be competitive in the MAC, you're going to have to split these games because overall, from what I've seen, Kent State is clearly the best. Toledo's number 2, and then I think it's Akron and Ball State 3-4, and then really UB, Ohio in that 5-6 area, and the rest of the teams, maybe Bowling Green gets wins here or there, but it's really very mediocre once you get past Akron at that 3 spot. I'd even say Ball State isn't the best team in the world too. So can they have a good record? Maybe, but I don't think they're really that good.
Yeah, so I'm looking, Mike. Currently 3-3 in the league. That puts them at tied for 5th with Bowling Green and Northern Illinois. Ball State 1 game ahead of them, and then obviously you mentioned Kent State, who, from that resume, Mike, they seem like a borderline at-large school.
If they would have won one of those 3, they would have been. Honestly, if they would have won one of those 3, they could have had the greatest year since that Nate Oates 32-4 year with UB. We'll see if they can keep it up.
You're talking about Gonzaga, who just had their 76-game home win streak broken the other night, and they almost pulled that off. You go to Houston, who is one of the best teams in the country and has been for years, and is almost unbeatable at home. They were Final Four team or Elite 8 team last year. I mean, that's impressive, Mike.
And Charleston is 21-1. John, Charleston's only loss this year was against North Carolina.
And I think they're in the top 15 now, if I'm not mistaken.
Charleston this year, they're in the top 20, and Charleston is beating Virginia Tech, Kent State. So you're talking about a Kent State team, and they were on the road for all 3 of those. Honestly, like if you put Houston at home, if you put Gonzaga at home, or Charleston at Kent State, you could make an argument that Kent State could have won all 3 of those games. Yeah. So I do think that is how good Kent State is on defense, and it's night and day when you watch them compared to UB. I'm not even here to grill UB. The win against Bowling Green was tremendous. Zid Powell went off, had 27 points. Curtis Jones is still having an incredible sophomore season. I do think Isaac Jack has some ability too. I've liked him down in the paint. So there are some pieces on this UB team. But what I notice is they are a team that can step up and dominate the middle tier, lower tier of the MAC, but they routinely struggle against the better teams outside of beating Ohio, which I'm still not sure what team the Bobcats are, because the Bobcats lost on the road to UB and Bowling Green, but then they just beat Central Michigan by 28 at home, and they had a chance to tie Kent State in the final seconds recently. So where you look at the Mid-American Conference overall, and I just want to go quickly through this, John, because I don't want to spend too much on the rest of the conference. But if you're looking at overall rankings in KenPom, Kent State is 53. They're the clear number 1. Tier 1, they're here. Then you got a tier 2 with Toledo, where they're 98th in KenPom. Akron's about 116. Then you have a drop-off to tier 3, where Ohio is 142, Ball State is 146. And then UB is at 200. Behind UB, you have Eastern Michigan 339, Miami, Ohio 304, Central Michigan 302, Western Michigan 287, Northern Illinois 286, Bowling Green 264. So you have 6 schools that are 264 or below. So what is the point of me saying this? UB is probably still going to win quite a few games. Yeah. And they're probably going to get a decent conference record when it's all said and done. But does that mean they're good? I don't think so. UB fans probably don't want to hear this, but the metrics say that UB is closer to what Niagara is than what the top tier of the Mid-American Conference is. And right now, KenPom has UB finishing the year 14-17 overall and 8-10 in Mid-American Conference play. I go on their message boards a lot. A lot of them have thought 10 wins is going to be where they'll end up around. If they end up 14-17 overall and 8-10 in conference play, there's going to be some serious discussions about how does this team move forward. And I've seen some people talking about how this year has actually been slightly more enjoyable for UB because you are seeing the development of new players with less expectations, while the last 3 years were disappointing when you had a big three that didn't live up to the
Yeah.
expectations, and it didn't always feel like they played with the emotion that many wanted. And I understand that. I truly do. The concerning part of it, though, is when you have a coach in his early 60s, it's not like you have a young coach where you're like, okay, we can go through these 2-3 years and grow and get better. With the transfer portal right now, you don't even know year to year if the players that you're developing that are young are even going to stick with your program. For all we know, Curtis Jones could average 17 points a game this year and then decide, you know what, I'm going to go to an A-10 school, or I'm going to go to a school in the Big East or something like that. It's very hard to get excited in these when they're blowing out a team like Bowling Green when they follow it up with a loss against Toledo. And I get it. It's Toledo's not an easy team. They're going to score, but eventually Jim Weitzel has to win some of these bigger games.
Yeah.
They just haven't come throughout the years.
So everything you just said, I agree with. I it's not the Toledo loss, Mike, that frustrates me. It's the fact that they were right there,
I
and it
get
was
it.
at
I get it.
home, and I watched that game start to finish. And here's my bold take. Okay, I'm gonna give you a little hot take about this team, and the reason I phrase this: Can you be content in the MAC? You said no. I'm gonna say yes, and here's the reason why. Okay, I believe that outside of Kent State, UB could be the second best team in the league. They could be the ninth best team in the league. I think they could be anywhere in between that range. There's the way. This is how UB needs to win these games. Just from my experience as a lower level assistant coach in my time in basketball, I don't want to run offense. I do not think this team is good in the half court. And I think that's when they lose games. If I'm Weitzel, I want shots up in the first 8 to 12 seconds of every single shot clock. And I'm going to take my chances that I can get to the basket with Powell, with Adams, with Jones, and with LaQuill Hartnett. I think LaQuill Hartnett is the X factor on this team, Mike. He's shooting about 55% from the floor. He's averaging almost 10 points, or a little under 10 points. Think about over 7 rebounds. And they're the most effective when they get guys like him, who might be in at the 5 spot, running the floor, catching passes in the open floor, and getting to the basket. The only way I see this UB team contending is if they're able to finish 2, 3, 6, or 7 in the MAC, and they can avoid Kent State and hope that somebody else beats them prior to getting there, which, again, that's a lot of different things that can
Well, if
happen.
you're talking MAC tournament, I have a different answer. Like if you're asking if you put UB in the MAC tournament, could they make a run? Yeah, they definitely could make a run. I'm talking more so. Do I think they have a chance at finishing near the top in the regular season in conference play? I don't see that for the regular season.
Yeah.
In the MAC tournament, if they're to 6 and they're playing Akron and say they match up well against Akron, they get an upset, and then next thing you know, they're playing Toledo in the second round and not avoiding Kent. Yeah, I could see a scenario where they go to the MAC championship and Kent State gets eliminated before they play them, and they have a chance of winning it. But
I mean, Mike, me and you have been watching. Me and you have been watching and going to Mid-American Conference games since like the mid 2000s. Okay, and there's always been like a clear cut line where the contenders start and where the contenders stop. It's always like that if you're above this line, and it's usually like UB, Kent, Akron, usually Ohio's in there, and then some years it's been Central. One year it was Western, whatever the case may be. But you kind of know if you're above that line, those are the teams that have a shot. What's so weird about this league, Mike, is that for the first time in a long time, that's not the case. I really feel like UB could be the second best team in this league, and I really feel like they could finish ninth. And neither outcome would totally shock me.
yeah, I get what you're saying. The only reason why I disagree with that is there's a clear fall after Ball State and Ohio. And in the metrics, at least. I'm not saying the metrics are everything, because the metrics said the Bills were the best team in the NFL, and we saw what they did against Cincinnati on Sunday. But when I see a Kent State team that's around 53, then a Toledo team that's right at 100, basically, Akron close to 115, then a Ball State and Ohio like 140, 145. I see basically the metric saying you got three teams in that top area. Normally, the MAC always has around three teams in that top 115. It's normally either Akron, Kent, Ohio, UB, or Toledo. That's normally like three of those five teams are normally in that top 115 each year. Sometimes it's two. Sometimes there's a fourth team that's competitive. But you got three teams that are, if you look on a yearly basis, they would compete well based on historic MAC teams. Ohio and Ball State are what you would typically think of what maybe an average Toledo team would be on a yearly basis, where they're around that 140, 150 mark, where they're not great, but they have another month to kind of decide, are we going to be in that class of contenders? Or are we going to just be a middling average team? When you're at that 200 point for UB, though, I think you and I have a little bit of a slight bias. We think UB is more talented than what their metrics are saying. Yeah. Like I do think UB could be a top 150, maybe 125 to 150. That's partially why I'm so hard on Jim Weitzel, is because I do think this team is underperforming overall. And what's hurt them in the metrics is their margin of losses. What I guess is frustrating is how can I bunch them in that top tier when they find ways to lose to the bottom teams in the country? Like we know that road games are tough in the MAC. I get that. But they've lost to Miami, Ohio. They've lost to Central Michigan. They've lost to Howard on a neutral site. Those are some horrendous losses. So I can't be putting them in the tier, even tier 2, when there's teams that are at the bottom of the MAC that'd be like, how can you put UB in tier 2 when they're losing to us? So like the thing about, and it's not that like Ohio doesn't lose to bad teams or that Ball State can't lose to bad teams, but Ohio also has the ability when they play certain teams where when they lose, they're losing close games against decent teams for the most part. They have a couple bad losses, but for the most part, they show something every once in a while. UB doesn't really show the solid performance unless they're playing somebody that's really beneath them, with the exception of the Colgate game earlier this season. So we'll see. This stretch up ahead, John, is going to really make or break my point of view on.
It's going to define
on UB. Playing Ball State on the road, I don't like UB's odds. I think that's going to be a tough game for UB. Not saying they can't pull it off, but I think UB's team last year, they win the game. UB's team this year, I think it's going to be a struggle against a Ball State team with more experience and some better players. Kent State on the road, I think that's going to be a wake-up call for UB, quite frankly. I think Kent is going to hold this UB team under 65, and they're going to really make things challenging for them. You could see a lot of turnovers. Then you have Akron at home. You need to find a way to get at least one of those three. If you get swept, you're sitting at 9-13, 3-6 in the MAC, and then that's very scary. And dude, it's just a tough stretch, because even after that, you got Western and Eastern, which you assume are 2 wins. But then after that, you have a stretch where you have Kent State at home, Ohio on the road, Akron on the road. You get one gimme with Central Michigan, and then you have Toledo on the road. So you're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's count this up. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their next 10 games are tough. They're sitting at 9-10 right now. They don't find this could be the first losing season since Reggie was the head coach.
Yeah, it's going to be a defining time for sure, and obviously the hope is that they don't start going over, Mike. that would obviously be a disaster. The hope is like they can surprise, maybe a win at Ball State. A win at Ball State would be impressive.
That's what I'm saying. It's not over. If they win these games, then you come out of it being like, damn, like okay, maybe they got some ability, maybe they got some talent. But that's the thing, John. If they win these games, their metrics are going to improve. They are going to move up, and then we will see a better story of what they are and what they can be. At this point, they haven't shown that yet, but they'll have an opportunity. And just to finish something that you said, you want UB to play with pace. Their adjusted possession length this year is 13th in the country on offense. Their adjusted tempo is 8th in the country overall.
So they play
UB does play fast, but their efficiency overall is 195th.
Yeah.
That's right in the middle, a little bit below average. Their efficiency defensively is 211th. Their effective field goal percentage is 217th. They turn the ball over more than that they should. One thing they are good at is offensive rebounding. But if you look at it, they shoot a very low percentage from three. They are not a good three-point shooting team. 2-point shooting, they're a little bit better than average, but they play fast, but they don't really get results that say they are necessarily effective doing it.
Yeah, you mentioned the offensive
rebound. They're better
rebounding.
fast and slow, but they're not great at either.
Yeah, the offensive rebound. That's my man, LaQuill Hartnett, man. I'm a big LaQuill Hartnett guy. The last 5 games, he's had 16, 12, 5, 6, and 12 in the rebounding category. Offensively, he's had 8, 5, 2, 5, and 6. I think he needs to. I think he started. He didn't start last game. He had started the previous 7 before that. He played 31 minutes last game. It really doesn't matter if you start or not when you're playing that many minutes. I think he's the key. I think Curtis Jones and him, they're the key in respective areas, and they need guys like Powell and Adams to be a little bit more consistent. It's a wait and see game with these guys, Mike. I'm interested for this week. I think it's going to be a real gut punch for these guys, and let's see how well conditioned they are. Let's see if they can take these body blows and come back and answer.
I hope they prove us
really
wrong.
Stay in a fight.
I hope they prove.
Yeah,
I hope they prove me wrong and prove you right. We both think they have talent. If they have the talent, this is the time that talent needs to step up and show it. Because how they do in this next stretch is going to determine, are you fighting just to get into Cleveland, or are you going to safely be in Cleveland and maybe even have a chance to be in that top 4 or 5?
I would agree. Mike, I want to wrap up today with just a couple other points. We gotta have our weekly Nate Oates update, and Mike, now they're getting first place votes. They're ranked second in the AP poll. I think they have just a couple votes under what Purdue has. So this is really awesome to see, Mike. As a fan who I don't miss a single minute of any Alabama basketball game. It's been really cool to watch. He's doing this all without Burnett, who's been out with a hand injury, wrist injury. Dom Welch has just come back. So they are undefeated in the SEC, the only team that's left undefeated. They have 23 votes, Mike, in the AP top 25. So that's been really awesome to see. It's really cool to see what he's done. I really hope that Alabama can. I've seen a lot of people online hope that they invest in a new arena for Alabama basketball.
That would be nice because their arena is kind of
old. It's cool. It's cool.
I feel like Alabama hoops, like for as much as I dislike their football program, Alabama hoops is kind of like, it's like the world wanting me to be a fan of the Crimson Tide basketball. Like first you steal my head coach, then you bring in an assistant coach that I wanted to be UB's head coach. Then you bring a UB person that was supposed to be at UB with you. Then you steal Mark Sears from Ohio. And now Dominic Welch is at Alabama. It's like you're taking players and coaches from all my favorite places. And all my other schools are suffering as a result. Like literally Ohio, you just ruined Ohio's season. You ruined UB basketball forever. You hurt St. Bonaventure, and here Alabama's number 2 in the country. So thank you, Alabama, for just ruining everything I care about I guess I got to root for you guys.
They have been a lot of fun to watch, Mike. And like I said, I don't think I've missed a minute all year long. They've been very fun to root. They've been very fun to watch, and Oates is extremely easy to root for. I want to go through a couple other updates, Mike. Just a couple shout outs here, just for our last 2 minutes, for some local teams that have been playing well and deserve some recognition. We talk a lot about the Big Four, and that's what we do. We cover the Big Four, but I do want to touch upon some other ones. I want to start with N-Trip, Niagara County Community College. Mike, they are 18-1. They are ranked second in the NJCAA Division II National Poll. They are going to compete and contend for a national championship this year. Billy Beeline consistently does a really good job over there. He has a couple local products on his team this year. Javon Jones is averaging 6 points a game. He's from Health Science. A couple other guys who don't play a whole lot yet. But that's really cool to see, Mike. I know they don't get a lot of attention down there. Just wanted to bring that up. They, like I said, 18-1. I think they started the year or something like 15-0, 16-0. I think that loss was just recently. Yeah, it was to number 12, Henry Ford. They just beat Herkimer, who was number 2 in the Division III NJCAA, and they just beat Sullivan, who's ranked number 8 in the Division II. They have and they just beat Monroe as well. So that's really cool to see. So good luck to N-Trip as they close out the rest of the year in February. Want to touch upon Damon as well, Mike. After they lost a lot of guys this year, Andrew Cisco being the main loss. They started 5-6, and they currently are 12-6. Back in the East Region poll, they've won 7 in a row. They are third in the league in the East Coast Conference. So, got to give some credit there to Mike McDonald, who has really found a way to right that ship over there, and really didn't take all but a half a year to get it back on track. So they will compete. Their next game is this Friday. They're on the road at Malloy and at Queens before being back at home for 2 games to open up February. And the last team I got to talk about, a little close to me, but Bryan and Stratton Buffalo, again, lost a bunch of guys, started a little slow, but Damone Brown has those guys winning 6 in a row. They're 12-5 right now, ranked second in the USCAA Division I poll. And they just came off a really good weekend where they picked up a really high-quality signature win over Washington Adventist, who is a consistent NAIA top 10, 15 program, and a win over Division II Cheney by 18 on the road. So credit to Coach Brown and those guys over there. I know I have a little bit of bias towards those guys being there for a while and coaching there and being friends with Damone, but he's consistently building the winner over there. And regardless of the level that it's at, Mike, it's really cool. And like I said, you got 3 guys at different levels. So N-Trip at the JUCO level, Damon at the D2 level, and Bryan and Stratton at the USCAA Division I level. It's really cool to see these teams that don't necessarily get that rub that a Division I team gets, but they're having tremendous seasons all in of itself, and all look to be like legitimate contenders in their respective conferences and leagues.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff. And it's important to point out that there is more than just D1 basketball in Buffalo. You've got 2 D2 schools here. The community colleges are obviously very successful. And then even the USCAA with Bryan and Stratton and Villa Maria. So definitely a lot of basketball out there. And it's good to give recognition to the different levels that are playing in the Buffalo area.
Yep, absolutely. So, all right, that's going to wrap up another episode 9 of our season-long podcast, Talking Big Four Hoops. Mike, I want to thank you, as always, for your continued expertise and ability to really put those metrics in an understandable form. It takes a lot of work to put it in a dumbed-down kindergarten-type version, and you do a great job with that. So we'll see if these teams can improve their metrics this week, each team with 2 conference games. Mike, conference season, almost the end of January. This is when it gets tough. So we'll see what these teams are made of this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait. And hopefully we can get some good results. Actually, I'm just looking at it right now. I might have a chance to go to the Kent State game on Friday. I got to see if I can make that work in my schedule or not, because I'm going to be in Akron on Saturday to see Ohio play. So might I be able to get a Kent State UB game on Friday? We'll just have to see.
we might get a big Four Hoops front row seat there for you, Mike. So that'd be awesome if you can make it. That's a great arena, a great atmosphere, and hopefully a big upset for UB. But he's Mike Bunt. I'm Jonathan Snyder. Again, follow us on Twitter. Mike, again, for all his Big Four stuff and Bills Cover One stuff. Check him out as well for all that. And we will see you everybody next week.